recital and partial fulfillment of my Doctor of Musical Arts degree in the percussion area of the J.T. and Margaret Talkington School of Music at Texas Tech University. My recital and accompanying DMA document is entitled A Review of Selected Published Method Books for the Conga Drum. Music method books have been utilized in academia to aid in the study of new and or familiar topics. Because of the wide range of authors' perspectives and teaching methods, it can be difficult for the novice learner or even seasoned educator and or performer to discern and recognize appropriate materials. My document will serve as a guide for applied conga drum study and aid primary and secondary music teachers, percussion specialists, music therapists, collegiate percussion instructors, and even experienced conga drummers. A research study of this type is necessary due to the lack of immediately available collated resources concerning the conga drum for the young learner, teacher, and or experienced performer, divided by appropriate age and skill level. While my document examines only the text portions of conga drum method books, this lecture recital will serve partially as an addendum and examine portions of the multimedia resources included with selected books. I will categorize and examine 3 styles of method books delineated by the specific publisher's targeted audience. These categories and audiences include elementary and middle school students, also referred to as the beginning level, high school and college students, also referred to as intermediate, and the experienced conga drummer, also referred to as advanced level. Components of each selected conga drum method book to be examined include author information and or goals of the book, performance practice historical context, conga drum properties and components, including tuning, care, and maintenance, stroke types and tone production, technical studies, applied literature, and supplementary resources provided, such as discographies and listening guides. Additionally, the appendices of my document will provide the readership with a number of conga drum resources categorized by publishing company and will also include VHS, DVD, and online resources. I've included a sample of some of these resources not examined in this lecture on page 29 of your handout, which will be covered toward the end of this recital. Many teachers and students utilize method books to aid in the process of learning a new instrument or to improve their skills on a specific topic or technique. When a learner needs assistance on a musical technique to enhance their current abilities, the author of a guiding text often presents specific exercises that provide a useful structure for an aspiring musician's practice time. With or without a teacher, instrumental music method books provide the means to obtain new musical information. These resources also allow a student to review previously learned techniques and develop new ways of enhancing their skills. The authors of these texts often provide specific insights that they have obtained while practicing their craft over years in real-world applications. These insights and sequential practice methods may aid a learner in new or difficult topics. Learning with the aid of a method book is possible without a teacher, though instructors are important to the process of learning to play an instrument in a way that method books generally can't be. Teachers in an applied study context can offer real-time feedback and supervise the incremental progress of a student they see regularly. While method books may not be the only route toward new musical information, they can be utilized to greatly increase a learner's understanding of a specific instrument and provide new techniques to enhance overall musicianship. The conga drum is a barrel-shaped drum made from strips of hardwood and is derived from the makuta drums of the Congolese origin, as stated by Rebecca Mallion in her book entitled Salsa Guidebook for Piano and Ensemble. This instrument has gained popularity over the years due in part to its folkloric usage in history and has been implemented in modern musical ensembles across multiple genres. Known in English as the conga drum, or simply the conga, Nolan Warden states in an article of Percussive Notes published by the Percussive Art Society that a more accurate term used in a traditional sense and by most Spanish speakers is tumbadora. For the purposes of this lecture, as well as the related method books that will be reviewed, conga drum will be used as the term for the instrument. respect to the popularization of this foreign instrument with a foreign name, Worden goes on to state in his article that in the early to mid-1900s, when people from the United States could still freely travel to Cuba, Cuban rhythms were picked up and popularized by the United States media. The advent of Cuban music to the dance halls and subsequently the culture of the United States was one of the main reasons that the conga drum began infiltrating the music of non-Latin origin. As salsa music and its subgenres, such as mambo, son, guaracha, and others, began losing popularity, drummers that were fluent in the language of the conga began branching out into other styles of music. The evolution of the drum from its more traditional role in traditional Cuban music into popular music genres such as Latin jazz, rock and roll, and Latin rock allowed a wider audience to experience the conga in the 1970s through the adaptations of Latin works by musicians such as Carlos Santana, Herbie Hancock, and others. Fast forward to today, and the conga can be seen on the stage of some of the world's biggest popular music stars. Conga drummers such as Paulo Stagnaro, who toured regularly with Ricky Martin, Fausto Cuevas, who performed with Stevie Wonder, and Lenny Castro, who is currently on tour with John Mayer, show these drums in a modern application. Method books specifically for Latin percussion instruments have been used for nearly 75 years. The oldest published method book discovered in the initial research for my document is entitled Drumming the Latin American Way, a new, comprehensive, and practical method by Isabelo Ernesto Marrero. First published by the Edward B. Marks Music Corporation in 1949, this method book contains a foreword by the famous Desi Arnaz, which states that the publication fills a long existing need. Just 5 years later, a new method book entitled Latin American Rhythm Instruments and How to Play Them was written by Humberto Morales in collaboration with Henry Adler. Like many method books of this time period concerning Latin percussion, many instruments are addressed rather than simply focusing on a single instrument for the entirety of the text. This resource contains both English and Spanish instructions and informational text to accompany the brief overview of such instruments as timbales, congas, bongos, and güiro. Also published with the aid of Henry Adler, Bob Evans' Authentic Conga Rhythms is getting closer to the type of text that solely concerns the conga drum. However, this text only briefly discusses 3 tones that Evans referred to as the open tone, the closed tone, and the sharp percussive stroke. Without giving much information about how a learner might utilize exercises to develop these specific sounds, Evans quickly uses the rest of the book's pages to discuss and gives examples of authentic Latin American rhythms, such as guaracha, rumba, merengue, mambo, and son, among others. Concerning this recital in my document, the study of the combination of conga drums and method books will reveal information about the goals, perspectives, and priorities of the authors. It is my hope that the reviewed method books will shed light on current available means of conga drum applied study, as well as reveal similarities and differences among multiple sources of conga drum pedagogy. Interestingly, many of the conga drummers that serve as authors of the method books that will be examined did not learn their craft from a method book. Method books were not a common resource for a hand drummer or percussionist who was not afforded a traditional music education within the realm of public school or higher education. Many conga drummers were simply immersed in the traditional Latin music setting and learned by rote from teachers and mentors without the use of books, and or on their own by listening and watching other musicians. After many successful careers playing these drums, numerous performers sought to provide resources for students and learners that they themselves were not afforded. Furthermore, Afro-Cuban music is inherently an oral tradition. The conga drums that can be found within this plethora of genres that encompass Afro-Cuban music may require less traditional American or more traditional Cuban methodologies and manners of instruction than the academies that employ the use of method books may offer. Regardless of these nuances, I believe it important to address the lack of collated resources for the conga drummer, as well as provide some resources categorized by age and skill level that may prove beneficial for learners seeking to utilize the application of a conventional method book. My research study is limited to conga drum method books distributed by music retailers in the United States that are readily available for purchase. While the authors of the previously mentioned initial Latin percussion method books served as important forerunners as to the types of texts that will be examined in this document, I review works specifically for the conga drum with no mention of any other instruments. My research only includes the examination of selected method books with the word conga in the title that were published during or after the year 2000, and will exclude resources that involve the instruction of timbales and bongos along with the conga drum, which is a common grouping among Latin percussion method books. The reasoning for the selection of these particular books conveys an effort to limit the research to method books written by conga drummers for conga drummers. This limitation, paired with the inclusion of books published within the last 20 years or so, narrows the scope of research in an effort to provide a representative sample of more modern publications. Lastly, the specific method books selected for review represent methods of conga drum applied study with applications beyond Afro-Cuban music and science. Rather than limiting method books that solely pertain to situations within an Afro-Cuban context, the subject matter of the resources examined in this study can easily be expanded to improve conga drumming in all genres. With this introduction and overview, I will now transition into musical examples from examined texts. Page 2 of your handout contains a list of the method books examined in this research study. Selected excerpts from books on this list will provide a brief overview of the contents and types of examples that accompany the text. Let's move on to our first example. If you look at page 3 of your handout, you will see an excerpt from the table of contents of the Tomás Cruz Conga Method, Volume 1. I've included parts 2 through 4 of the table of contents to showcase what Cruz considers important and fundamental to developing initial conga technique. If you're already familiar with conga technique, you may notice a tone class that is not present. The author of the text waits until page 35, over halfway through the text, to introduce the technique known as manoteo. Manoteo is also referred to in conga drum pedagogy as palm tip, heel toe, and occasionally bass tip or another related or similar name. Remember this intentional exclusion, as the author of the next book will do the same. Page 4 of your handout is an excerpt, page 19, from the book that shows the 5 basic strokes and musical notation that Cruz chooses to utilize in his musical examples. Here is what the author has to say about the fundamental tones. All conga strokes are produced by some combination of the fingers, the flat of the hand, the palm, and the wrist. Arm weight is used only to add volume. The hand rebounds from the drum skin in the open slap strokes, resulting in a ringing tone. The other 3 basic strokes are closed or dry, meaning that the hand and fingers come to rest on the drum skin after striking it. Each basic stroke is thoroughly covered in the exercises and DVD chapters of Part 4. Looking at the top graphic on page 4 of your handout, it is important to note that there is no standardization of musical notation for the conga drum, and many method book authors and composers use numerous ways of notating tones. This can be seen as a potential source of confusion, similar to the issue also found commonly in drum set notation, though drum set has less variables as far as tone production, leading to notation for that instrument to become a little more standardized over time than conga of the proper sound of a few specific tones. Here is the open tone.
Open, right.
The closed slap.
Slap, close. You're right.
And bass tone.
Bass. Right.
Conga drums can vary wildly by maker, with manufacturers using different types of wood or a synthetic material, such as fiberglass, for the shell. Furthermore, a common difference among conga manufacturers is the head material. Calf, mule, buffalo, or another rawhide skin may be used. Or, many modern drumhead manufacturers, such as Remo and Evans, have created specialized synthetic material in an attempt to emulate a skin head and increase longevity of the drum head. Taking away certain variables, such as the tuning of the drum, tension of the head, drum size, and drum and playing surface material, it can be seen from the excerpts that I played that it is up to the learner to emulate what they are hearing and seeing on the DVD. I will now demonstrate combination exercises provided by Cruz that can be found on page 5 of your handout. From the top of that page, exercises 12 and 13 train you to play different strokes consecutively with the same hand. This may seem illogical at this point, but when you get to the complex 3 drum marchas of volume 3, it is necessary for this type of dexterity, the necessity for this type of dexterity will become apparent. Here's exercise 12. Exercise 13 is the same thing off the left. Exercises 14 and 15 review all 3 of the strokes covered to this point, alternating right and left hands. Remember to start slowly and to make sure each stroke is cleared before building up speed. Here's exercise 14. Exercise 15. Volume 1 of the Tomas Cruz Conga method continues on to include more combination exercises utilizing the previously mentioned strokes. These exercises serve to create seamless transitions between tones with the goal of producing equal sounds from each hand. Next, the author discusses manoteo, or heel toe technique, which will be examined briefly in the next method book on your list. After After all of the tone exercises conclude, the author transitions to a section concerning rudiments on the conga drum and lays out a few pages of exercises utilizing the single stroke roll, double stroke roll, paradiddle, paradiddle diddle, and triple stroke sticking patterns. Cruz states that the section is included in an attempt to increase strength and volume and serve as a precursor to solo playing. The method book concludes with Part 7, marchas, and Part 8, recursos. Marchas serve as the foundation of many grooves on conga, with the most simple marcha being recognized by another name, tumbao, which sounds like this. Part 8, recursos, which is translated to resources, can be translated in a musical context as licks. These written examples of licks give the player a few specific ideas that can be learned and played in solo sections. Appendix 1 of this book is entitled Clave, with discussion on clave direction and the different types of clave. Appendix 2 is entitled Marchas and Eighth Notes and contains examples of what patterns a performer might play using one or two drums in a generic salsa setting, cha-cha-cha or bolero. Appendix 3 is a selected discography with 4 albums in which Tomás Cruz plays congas with performers such as Pablito FG and Manolín, also known as El Médico de la Salsa, the Doctor of Salsa. Moving on to page 6 of your handout, we will now briefly cover Giovanni Hidalgo's The Ultimate Conguero, an inside look at the techniques that have made Giovanni Hidalgo the #1 conguero in the world. Page 6 is an exact copy of the first page in this method book. The entire table of contents is contained, and the sequence of study can be seen from the titles and subtitles of each section. The 8 parts contained cover topics such as basic strokes, developing technique, application of rudiments, manoteo, which Hidalgo refers to as palm finger stroke, and play along tracks. Turn to the next page, page 7, where you'll find Hidalgo's explanation of the basic strokes accompanied by photos. Open tone, produced by striking the drum with the fingers of the hand from just in front of the palm and immediately bouncing off the drum head, producing a full resonant sound. Bass tone, produced by striking the drum with the palm of the hand in the center of the drum and immediately bouncing off the drum head. Closed slap, often referred to as just the slap, is produced by pressing against the drum head with the left hand while playing the slap with the right hand. The palm of the left hand should be completely down in normal position. Open slap, produced by allowing the fingers to bounce off the drum head immediately after it is struck. This produces a slap sound, but with a broad ringing sound. And muffled stroke, sometimes indicated by MF. Look at the bottom right-hand side of this page to see how each stroke will be notated. Already we can see that the tones will be written differently from the ones that Cruz presented. Turn to page 8 of your handout to see the notation in Hidalgo's presentation of combination exercises. I will play exercises 1, 2, 3, and 6 to demonstrate part of his tone production process. This is combining the basic strokes, open and muffled. Exercise 2 combines the open tone with the bass tone. Notice that both of these exercises can be played with either hand. Now we combine the open tone with the slap. In this case, the closed slap. The next section of the ultimate conguero I would like to cover concerns the application of rudiments on the conga drum, which can be found on page 9 of your handout. Rudiments are an important component of developing dexterity, vocabulary, as well as physical endurance, or chops. It is nice to see this inclusion across multiple conga drum method books in an attempt to draw parallels from rudimental drumming, and also to expose conga drummers to these vocabulary building blocks that they may not see or be familiar with if rudimental drumming was not part of their background. I will now demonstrate examples 2 and 3 from page 9. A great way to practice alternating strokes is by using a snare drum rudiment called the 5-stroke roll. On the snare drum, 5-stroke rolls are normally played with double strokes, right, right, left, left, right. But on the congas, they are normally played as single alternating strokes, right, left, right, left, right. Here's number 2. And number 3 uses muffled and open slap in the same context. To conclude discussion on this book, I will demonstrate a play-along found at the end of the text and can be found on page 10 of your handout. Recital Mañanero is the first play-along track with an accompanying track that features a 4-measure bass guitar pattern that is continually repeated. Many method books written for percussionists feature 2 versions of play-along tracks, one with the drums included and another with the drums left out of the mix. This is not the case with this method book, however. So I will not play with the track, but rather let Hidalgo's work speak for itself. The final method book in the elementary and middle school category, or beginner level, is Trevor Salom's book entitled First Lessons Conga. Containing very similar elements to the 2 method books already discussed, I would like to highlight a page from this text. After discussion of the conga drum history, music notation, posture, tone production, and music terminology, Salom quickly writes exercises for the tones and includes manoteo very early, unlike Cruz and Hidalgo. I would now like to demonstrate Salom's approach to building the techniques required in a marcha, or tumbao. Please turn to page 11 of your handout, if not there already. Here's the first exercise for the manoteo build-up. The asterisk says, play this line slowly with one hand, then the other. Next is the manoteo with slap. Next is picoteo, or the closed march, and it's used in a musical piece to establish solid time without high volume. Examples would be in intros or behind the soloist. And lastly, manoteo with opens. The next part of this lecture concerns pedagogical resources from the intermediate category, or method books aimed toward a high school and college student, with backgrounds in at least the fundamentals of conga drumming. Returning to the author Tomás Cruz, we will briefly examine components of his conga method, Volume 2. Contents of this method book include Afro-Cuban folkloric marchas from older Cuban pop music, songo patterns and variations, marchas from non-Cuban rhythms, and once again, recursos and soloing. The first pattern I'd like to discuss can be found on page 12 of your handout. This marcha from the Afro-Cuban folkloric section of the book is a common pattern for 3 conga drummers on 3 different drums to execute in a setting usually accompanying dance. In this example, Cruz has provided a common adaptation to be played by one conguero. Below the musical pattern, Cruz has also given the reader a brief history of the pattern and a conceptual discussion on the cyclical groove known as contraclave that can be heard in the open tones of the guaguancó. Those familiar with the different forms of clave, why don't you clap along quietly with me as I demonstrate the contraclave. Feel free to join in as you feel comfortable. Is revealed by your 2 side of the clave coinciding with the 3 open tones of the guaguancó, with the initial pickup from the low drum. Here is the guaguancó in a more modified context for one drummer. Songo pattern as it relates to the conga drum. These examples can be found on page 13 of your handout. Here is what Cruz has to say about the pattern. This most basic songo marcha repeats after 2 beats. It differs from a standard salsa tumbao in that the consecutive bass strokes allow the open tones to be moved to the big drum, and an offbeat left-hand slap to be inserted in the place of the tip. Cruz also lists recommended listening patterns to the various types of marchas in this presentation of many conga grooves and variations. Here's marcha 14, songo básico, basic songo. From the previous marchas that the first 3 tones are exactly the same as a typical tumbao, and then we move to the 2 consecutive bass tones that he had indicated to get down to that low drum. I will now play audio examples of marcha 15 and 16 so you can hear how Tomás Cruz interprets these particular patterns.
Songo 2. Ritmo songo. Variación 3.
last topic of coverage for this method book can be found on page 14 of your handout. This first page for part 7, entitled Recursos, gives more advanced ideas for a soloist than the first volume of this Conga method. Here's recurso number 1. The next method book in the intermediate section of the examined texts is the Conga Cookbook by Poncho Sanchez. Born in Laredo, Texas, this musician also chose to include actual Mexican-American recipes in the method book, hence the title Cookbook. Similar to Trevor Salom's build-up of the marcha that was previously mentioned, Sanchez's approach to the building of the mambo groove can be found on page 15 of your handout, which I will now demonstrate. Here's the line that accompanies track 19. And now an excerpt from the second example, entitled track 20. And the last example found at the bottom of the page. I will now play an excerpt from the Mambo Play Along, which can be found at the bottom of page 16 of your handout. Similar to Giovanni Hidalgo's method book, this play-along track only has a version with congas and doesn't include an option for an intermediate conga drummer to play alone with the other instrumentalists. Perhaps this is done purposefully in an effort to match the sounds that the learner is hearing in that moment. The last portion of this book in your handout is from the section entitled Soloing and can be found starting at the bottom of page 17 and continuing on page 18. I will now play excerpts from solo number 1. Here, Sanchez states, even though it's in cut time, to play the tempo of a cha-cha-cha. Section beginning with 16th notes. Here, Sanchez gives you a chance to combine multiple tones in quick fashion. The last book in the intermediate section is Richie Cajate Garcia's Play Congas Now, The Basics and Beyond. This method book starts, like most others that I've examined, with author bio notes, conga history, a notation key, tuning ideas, playing position, and then immediately moves into the tones. Different from the method books for elementary and middle school students, the tone chapter of this text includes manoteo, or what this author calls heel finger motion, as part of the fundamental strokes. After the sound developing exercises and clave discussion, the author includes a section on conga patterns from specific geographical regions. These subtitles are Patterns from Cuba, Patterns from Puerto Rico, and Patterns from Santo Domingo. Before concluding the method book with independent exercises and a play-along, Garcia includes a section on conga playing in non-Latin contexts, which I would like to highlight and can be found on pages 19 and 20 of your handout. I will now demonstrate examples 1, 3, and 5 on page 19. These grooves are just a few examples that can be applied to pop, rock, R&B, and funk. Here's number 1. Groove number 3. And groove 5. Page 20 of your handout has examples of real-world applications, and in the case of this text, includes tracks with and without congas for a learner to use as reference and subsequently play along with. I will now play the last example at the bottom of page 20.
9A in 5/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And now without congas.
9B in 5/8. Play along. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Also, an important note about the Garcia text, it contains the entirety of the method book in both English and Spanish. The last section of this lecture is devoted to texts for advanced or experienced conga drummers. The first text to be examined is the third and final volume of the Tomás Cruz method. This text goes deep into the genre known as timba, which often requires extremely experienced and virtuosic players to perform this style at a high level. Contents include in-depth clave discussion, timba marchas, longer marchas, and detailed discussions regarding the performance of full arrangements and the creation of your own conga parts. Please turn to page 21 of your handout to see an example of one of these longer marchas. Rather than play a single 4-beat pattern for the entirety of a song or a section, Cruz gives an example of a longer, more complex pattern to accompany the other musicians. If you look at the top of page 21, Cruz even gives a specific album and song where this type of marcha is utilized. I will now play the accompanying DVD on this particular pattern. includes a slow version of the same. If you will please turn to page 22 of your handout, a discussion on the function of the congas and the sections of a timba arrangement will ensue. This section of the book is leading the conga drummer to a point at which they can now move beyond simply playing patterns and grooves and begin to understand larger song forms and relationships between songs across salsa, timba, and other genres. Consider the likeness between this example and form and analysis. After a sequence of 4 semesters of college theory, a musician moves into form and analysis to gain the tools to zoom out their perspective and analyze larger structures. Here's page 22 of the handout, starting with functions of the congas. A marcha, or tumbao, is any repeating rhythmic pattern that the conguero or other rhythm section members play to keep time. A bloque, or break, is a short and exciting rhythmic figure that the conguero plays in unison with the other percussionists at various key points in the arrangement. Timba has a lot more bloques than salsa, and they tend to be more complex and creative. Bloques can come during any section. Moving on to fills, they are like bloques, except that they're played by only one player and usually improvised. They can be added during the marcha to add excitement and to respond to other instruments, or during sections where the conguero would otherwise be laying out, such as a pedal section. The last bolded text, laying out, should not be overlooked. What you don't play is just as important as what you do play. Moving on to sections of the overall arrangement at the bottom of the page. The preview section, if there is one, gives a brief taste of a coro from later in the song before the beginning of the arrangement. These are very common in concerts, but also sometimes occur on studio recordings. The introduction is an instrumental section featuring the horns and or the keyboards. Moving on, the cuerpo, or body, or head, is the main song form that the lead vocalist sings at the beginning of the recording, usually punctuated by the horns. It's almost always the mellowest and most melodic part of the arrangement, and the conguero plays much as you would in a salsa arrangement. Although sometimes, even in the cuerpo, a special marcha is invented to fit the song. Page 23, the puente, or bridge section, is a brief transition featuring the horns, which leads from the cuerpo to the rest of the arrangement. Moving down to the middle of the page, the coro section features a call and response between the coros of the backup singers and the guias, previously called pregones, of the lead vocalists. Next paragraph. The mambo section features the horns, but is also the section where the conguero has the most freedom to add soloistic material and polyrhythms. In traditional salsa, the vocalists lay out and the horns play a figure that usually lasts 4 or 8 bars and then is repeated 2 to 4 times. The last section, motivo, if there is one, is a breakdown designed to introduce a particularly interesting tumbao, usually played in unison by the pianist's left hand and the bass. And last, solo sections feature individual instrumentalists, either with or without coros. These are all examples of sections or parts of a larger form to be learned by the method book user of Volume 3. The next book to be discussed is Rumba Soloing Techniques, Volume 1, Afro-Cuban Conga Drum Improvisation by Cliff Brooks. Rumba soloing can be a difficult topic to grasp, and Brooks presents his concept of soloing fundamentals in an interesting way. Rather than use traditional notation, Brooks utilizes time-keeping lines as well as the horizontal downbeat diagram, which can be found on page 24 of your handout. I wanted to include this diagram as well as an example of this type of notation in action, since I was not familiar with this mode of notation before researching for my DMA document. If you turn to page 24, you can begin to decipher this type of notation that you might not be familiar with. It's basically a two-measure phrase divided by 4 vertical lines. I will now play the accompanying tracks to page 25 in your handout. See if you can follow along to the diagram that Brooks uses. Here's example number 1. Example 2. Example 3. And lastly, example number 4. The last book in my lecture is The Conga Drummer's Guidebook by Michael Spiro. This world-renowned pedagogue is known for his work in Cuban folkloric settings and was, up until 2019, a faculty member in the percussion area at Indiana University. Contents of his book include basic strokes, clave discussion, phrasing in Wawanko, heel-toe technique, agility exercises, stamina exercises, among others. Please turn to page 26 of your handout, and I will demonstrate a portion of section 12 entitled Rhythmic Cells for Improvising. The main motive not in your handout begins on the and of 4, if you're thinking in 4/4 time. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Example 1b displaces that motive by 1/8 note, starting on the downbeat now. Move down to example 1c, and now we're going to start mixing some of the tones. Adding another tone, the muted stroke, in example 1d, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Example 1e is twice as long, but continues along those same motivic lines. On page 27 of your handout, we're going to use the same idea, but now with one tone being played at a time. Open tone. You can think of this as a dotted quarter note that continues over the bar line. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Resolves on that downbeat of what would be the 4th bar. Example 2b, using the same idea, adds the slap. 1, 2, 3, 4. Revoiced with 3 sounds. Page 28 of your handout says, now if you want to use this cell in a smaller amount of time, you can add a single 8th note to to round off the phrase and cadence early on a downbeat. Here's an example, 2D. Resolves on that downbeat. 2E, continuing along the same lines, adding this flat. Finally, maximize the potential of this rhythmic cell by starting it in places other than the downbeat. Here's example 2F. 1, 2, 3, 4. Etc. Example 2G, we're going to start on beat 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. I very much hope that tonight's lecture has been informative and helpful to your understanding of conga drum method books, with particular attention to specific content divided by skill level. The very last page of your handout has a sample of resources that you might find useful that are more interactive and not a typical method book. The included video and online resources can be purchased directly from the publisher, or in some cases have been uploaded in their entirety to YouTube. Feel free to look through this list for resources that might benefit you or someone you know who is looking to study conga drums. In conclusion, I would like to thank Dr. Rogers and my committee for working with me on this project. And once again, thank all of you for coming. Thank you very much. We do have maybe 5 minutes if anyone has questions regarding any of the content I covered today. So if anything comes to mind, feel free to ask.
I have one.
Yes.
So, John, out of the books that you have looked at and that you really examined closely, because I know you have certain limitations on what books you were looking at, would you have one that you would say, after looking at these, is now your favorite in terms of what you think pedagogically would be sound for somebody to go through, or one that you were surprised at what information was there?
I had heard of the Tomas Cruz method before, but never really looked through it. And what I really love about it is it uses different note heads for each of the tones, so you can kind of really associate a tone with a specific visual image. And it has a lot of good beginning method kind of material. But one that I was really surprised by was the Cliff Brooks Rumba stuff. That book had no musical notation that we're used to at all. It had only the graphic that you saw in your handout. So once you can get kind of past that barrier, if you're really used to looking at traditional music notation, and that could be really beneficial for you for rumba soloing or in other contexts such as that. Any others? Yes, John.
Did any of those method books that you've looked at have any longer form solos?
There were a couple. The last volume 3 of the Cruz method, has a couple of solos in there that are taken directly from what he played on tracks.
Oh, okay.
So you can find some of those. The Hidalgo book has one play along that's kind of beginning to intermediate, so it's not too difficult after maybe a year or so of study. And I think those are the only 2 that contained written solos. I'll have to go back and check, but yeah, that's one thing I would like to see in a future method book, either written by myself or another, is just more solos. Like, here is what you can play as a solo on a recital, or just for a performance after study of these drums. Yes, Stephanie.
On page 25, did that guy come up with this entire notation?
Yes, that's what he says. In his book, he talks about how he wanted to take the audio and the visual components and take away what some might see as a barrier in traditional notation. So he came up with that method to kind of simplify in a graphic form reading phrases and patterns for Roomba. All right, if there are no other questions, thank you very much, and feel free to contact me at jon.ortiz@ttu.edu if some questions come to mind after today.